Good morning. It is a Monday morning here in Brisk, Noblesville, Indiana. My name is Mayor Chris Jensen, and you are watching Mental Health Monday for Monday, the 27th day of January, a dark and cold month, which is all the more reason why we are glad that you are hopefully tuning into Mental Health Monday today. I am joined by my good friend, a true public servant in every aspect of her being, Kristen Boyce, the owner of Pathways to Healing Counseling. Good morning, Kristen.
Good morning, Mayor Jensen. I am so excited for our Mental Health Monday today.
Always needed, but in particular this time of year, we know that it is a dark time of year. It's a cold time of year. If you're here locally, we know we have folks tuning in from all over the world, which is awesome. But we can tell you a lot of our nation, and in America at least, has been cold and dark the last couple of weeks. So we know it's important for a chance to have a mental check-in, and that's why we want you to be here. I can tell you, Kristen, from a city side, we have seen just even in our tracking data over 911 runs and EMS runs that mental health is a concern right now. We see certainly a spike in suicidal ideations and all those things this time of year. So it's important that we tackle that. So we are glad that you're hopefully tuning in live, or if you're watching it later, welcome to the show. Please feel free to chime in. You can say hi, you can ask questions. If we don't know the answers, we'll track them down for you. We are just glad that you are here. But before we get started, before we even address what our topic is going to be, we need to get ourselves in a proper headspace. And we do that oftentimes by square breathing. So, Kristen, if you wouldn't mind leading us through a little square breathing exercise, I'd appreciate it.
This is the first thing I teach clients when they come in, as you know. And this time of year is our most popular time of year to see clients. It is, if you're feeling down, you're feeling depressed or anxious, you're not alone. Please know that. And we're going to hopefully give you some coping strategies today, talk about how to handle it. But the first thing I do, whether you're anxious or feeling more depressed, because we might lean more towards anxiety or more towards depression. Like in my relationship with my husband, I'm more anxious, he gets more depressed. And so it's really helpful for you to know that, like, where do you lean? And so we work on breathing in our house individually and as a household. Breathing resets the nervous system. It recenters us. It activates the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is our rational part of the brain, out of the amygdala, fight, flight, freeze, flop, or fawn, which is our people-pleasing response. Flop is like the faint response. It helps regulate us, get us back to a calm, centered state. That's why we teach it. There is neuroscience behind why breathing is so important. I think it's important once you understand it, what it's doing physiologically, what it's doing to your brain and your body, and how they're working together to help you get more present and more centered. So that's why I encourage people to practice it. Don't knock it till you try it on a consistent basis, because if once your body starts to have muscle memory and recognize, oh, this is how we're getting back to calm, you will see a huge difference. We work with this with first responders, and they in particular will say, this helps me before I go on a run, or perhaps they're in a high stressful situation, or at work, you're trying to deal with work stress, or at home with the family. So what we start with is feet on the floor. So we're grounding into the present moment. We're grounding the body into the here and now, and having your brain think of your feet. Now we're getting out of the fight, flight, freeze response into the present moment by pressing into the feet. We're going to inhale for 4, hold for 4, slowly exhale out our mouths. And this is the key. We want the exhale to be a lot longer than the inhale. And what I see with clients is we kind of go, and I'm like, okay, that's a breath, but that's not the full benefit of the breath. You're not going to get much out of that. So you've got to kind of belly breathe. So we're going to inhale through our nose. We're going to hold it. And then a slow release, like you're cooling soup out your mouth. Feel free to stretch. Notice your body's if you're sitting or you're standing, notice how your body's feeling. Let's do one more. Deep inhale. Hold. And release. And notice I really went longer on that exhale to get the full benefit. I was at the Indiana State Thespian Conference over the weekend, And guess what they had a workshop on? The whole workshop was
Breathing.
the entire workshop, because this is something we now have more information and knowledge about. It's beneficial to every soul on this planet. So, this is the number one thing. If you take one thing away from today that I would encourage you with, would be this strategy. Square breathing would be the number one thing that I would teach you.
Well, I would say I do it all the time. In my job, I try to model that for my kids. We were just talking this weekend about square breathing when we were getting frustrated about a basketball game. So it is incredibly applicable to all that you do. So I appreciate that exercise. Makes you feel good as well. So, all right, we want to dive in a little bit around the topic of depression and of loneliness. Chris, I'm going to let you kind of guide us in that a little bit. But I can say, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of forms of depression. There's a lot of times a year. This is a seasonal time. I've admitted in the past where I've struggled at times with seasonal depression in the past, and not so much much anymore, as I've tried to look at coping strategies about working out, getting sunlight, etc. But I know there's a lot of folks that battle at this time of year. So I want to kind of dive in. And then loneliness is something that we, even on the city side, I want to just put a plug in that we're trying to tackle from even a design standards as we look at neighborhoods and designing them where there's more meeting space, for example, where there's more ways to get to know your neighbors. So we're even trying to change some of our city code, Kristen, to address that a little bit around the loneliness factor, which I think is key for all of us to be thinking about in every aspect of our life. So with that, I'll let you kind of guide where we go from there, but I know I'll have some questions, and obviously anyone's welcome to chime in with questions that they have along the way too.
Yeah, let's talk about depression, because depression, I think, gets misunderstood, because really we're looking at duration, functioning in four categories. So we're looking at emotional, physical, behavioral, and cognitively. So let's break those down. What does this mean to feel depressed? It affects every aspect of your whole physical being. It affects your body. So oftentimes you'll feel like your body will feel heavy, fatigued, exhausted. It will impact sleep. Either you're sleeping too much or you're sleeping not enough. It'll impact your eating habits. So perhaps you're not eating enough, or you're overeating. You're eating, as we call, eating your feelings, to try to cope with it. If you are coping through other substances, we will see an uptick in alcohol use and substance use to try to feel better, even though alcohol is a depressant. So when people are like, I feel worse, I go, yeah, it keeps you stuck in the feelings of isolation, worthlessness, hopelessness. And that's really what depression is. It's a pervasive feeling of hopelessness, like helplessness and despair. And so when we look at it, we're going, okay, are you getting up and showering? If it's affecting your daily functioning, then we need to get services. So we need to have, I call it wraparound care, where you have your physician involved, potentially a psychiatrist or a counselor. Sometimes it just takes some therapy. And so we're working through, maybe there's a time of year that is associated. Let's say you had a death or a grief or a loss or a transition or a move of some sort. And you're like, this January, every single year. And yeah, it's the weather, but it feels like there's something more. There may be an anniversary connected to it that really needs to be processed, tended to, nurtured. We also look at our thinking. When our thinking feels like, there's no hope for me. I don't see a way out of this. We can't just think our way out of depression. And people think, well, just, snap yourself out of it. Just pull yourself up by the bootstraps. That'd be great if people could really feel like I can do that. It is a whole body experience. That's why oftentimes when it's been 2 weeks or longer, if it's pervasive in your functioning, let's say you're having trouble in your relationships, let's say you're not able to get up for work, you're not eating, or you're really losing weight, we really need to have an intervention at that point. We need assistance, because that means it's taken over in a pervasive way. So if it's been more than 2 weeks, that's what we say we need some services or some support in that. And there's nothing, I know people carry a lot of shame around it. Like, I should, and I hear this a lot, I should just be able to move up. I should just be able to get up. I shouldn't feel this way. What's wrong with me? Everything in my life is okay. Why can't I just feel better? And that's when we go, usually what I find, yes, we can look at family history if there's some depression there, but usually what I find is there's something underneath it that has happened or some shame or trauma that's gotten stuck in the nervous system that just needs to, I don't say just, but that needs to be tended to, reprocessed, and released. And so we look at those areas. We look at emotional, we look at how are you feeling emotionally, physically, what's happening in the body. We look at behavioral, are you using more substances? Are you not brushing your teeth? Are you not showering? Are you not taking care of yourself? So we see self-care tends to decrease. And then cognitively, are you really having trouble? Maybe there's some rumination there. Maybe there's some looping thoughts that you're not able to move through. And so these are signs that you talk to your physician, call 988. They will help plug you into resources. Look on the city's website for all the mental health resources that are available. There's lots of free nonprofit, and then sometimes churches have free support systems or a 12-step program. Here's what I want to say is even when you're surrounded by people, you can still feel alone. And this is the misnomer. This is one of the myths I say. How many times have you been in a situation where you've been with people and you still feel alone?
Oh, absolutely. Very isolated, right? Even though you might be in a crowd, I think that's a very, very common feeling.
Yes, and I don't think we talk about it enough because we're like, well, I was with people and that should cure it. Well,
Mhm.
sometimes it helps and sometimes you still feel lonely. And so
Mhm.
we look at some of these myths or like for example, with depression, people think it's just about sadness. Yeah, that's one aspect of depression. There's so much more. Like I said, we're looking at what other emotions are you feeling? Maybe there's some grief there. Maybe there's this feelings of hopelessness and despair. And is there anything else going on that the brain doesn't really compute? So we work a lot with the body when it comes to depression. How do we help the body start feeling safe again? So we know vitamin D. So we might look at, and I'm not a doctor, don't play one on TV, but sometimes we look at, a physician can look at what else is the body missing. Like we know with daylight, it's proven that that affects our mood. It is not something we're making up. We are meant to have sunlight and daylight. So we have those, what we call therapy lights that you
Mhm.
turn on in the morning and you have them on while you're getting ready. So your body can then start getting the chemicals that it needs, the vitamins that it needs, the neurotransmitters need to function and wire and fire. That helps us. How much screen time are we using? How much alcohol are you consuming? How much caffeine and sugar are you intaking? I mean, we're all kind of sick of hearing about that. And there was a reason why we're talking about it. And movement, what are you physically able to do? We know that if we move our bodies, it's releasing serotonin, it's norepinephrine. I mean, we are really working on these chemicals in the body to help you feel better.
Mhm.
And I really want to talk about shame as it's connected to depression. Shame says there's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. And I just want to say that shame wants to take us down the dark abyss. And what we really want to work on when I have someone, what we all have shame, of not feeling good enough or feeling defective. And what I really work with people on is helping nurture that part, and changing those shoulds to coulds. And what can I physically able to do? And one of the most important things I think is a routine. And people get sick of this, but I'm telling you, a routine then helps the brain know here's what's coming up next. Here's what I can do to help myself. So, for example, my morning routine, I get up and I have a practice. I get up and I write my 5 items of gratitude. I write kind of what are my intentions for the day. And then I write because writing helps process your worries, your fears, your feelings of hopelessness and despair and unworthiness. It helps move it up and out. And we know scientifically people that write feel better. I mean, it's actually proven. And then I try to walk several times a week on the treadmill because right now, or walking around your house, or walking in, a local school, or wherever you can find the mall, wherever you can find, if you're able to, physically move. It doesn't have to be this, oh, I got to go to the gym and I've got it because that shuts people down sometimes. It's little steps. What one little step can you make? And there's a great book called It's Not Always Depression. So I want to give a resource. It's Not Always Depression by Hillary Jacobs Hendel. Highly recommend it because it gets beneath what is underneath what's underneath depression. And we're
Mhm.
calling it depression, but how do we move through it to get to the other side? So if you want a resource, that's my number one book that I love.
Can I ask a little bit of a question? Because I want to focus on the body thing because I think there is that misnomer sometimes. And I think it's a societal issue sometimes about like, oh, I need to get myself out of this. I need to pull myself up to your point, kind of like the macho man thing, right? And I think we need to break that down and realize like you may not physically be able to, you will not be able to physically do that. So can we talk a little bit more about the physicality, like what your body feels like in a depressed state? And then I also want to kind of drive home a little bit more around movement. You and I have had this conversation multiple times. I said one of the biggest things I've learned from Kristen Boyce's 5 years is that anxiety lives in the body, and you have to give it a out. You have to process it, move it. So I would like to touch about that. And then one quick story: my lovely wife Julie Jensen, her late grandmother, always had next to her bed she was Ukrainian, and she had a little bowl with little people in it, and she called it her worry people. And she would always tell the little people her worries, and then she'd put them in so they could worry for her. And again, just kind of a generational way of thinking about that back then that people needed ways to process those worries. So she had her worry people that she would put in a little bowl, and then they worried for her. So just a cute little story. It reminded me of your modern day writing down. She had worry people.
Yeah, and they have those for little kids too.
Yeah.
Like they have worry dolls.
Yeah.
You give the doll your worries, or they have books that are great for kids.
Let
And
them worry for you.
Yeah, I mean, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to release it. We don't want to feel like this. Here's the thing: nobody wants to feel depressed. No one wants to feel anxious. No one wants to feel shame, and yet it's a universal part. Now, there's major depression, which we were just talked about. There's seasonal depression, which is based on weather and what's happening on the outside. And those can kind of look similar, but one is more pervasive than the other. And then we have, this idea that let's go to your point that emotions live in the body. Okay, let's just use that as a baseline. Emotions live in the body. And once you start to recognize what emotion am I feeling that's living in my stomach, mine is fear. Someone else's might Depression might live in their chest. Depression might live in, the heaviness in their body. Oftentimes with depression, what I hear is exhaustion, fatigue, extreme exhaustion, extreme fatigue, and a heaviness in the body. It almost feels like it's like a heaviness in the body. And so if you've ever felt like that, think about you, like when you feel the most lethargic, and that's what depression can feel like. It takes everything for you to get up out of bed. It takes everything for you to get up and take a shower. That's what depression feels like. And it can feel different for different people. So I don't want to project that everybody feels this way. But once you start to recognize, what am I feeling with the sensation in my body? Okay, what am I feeling with the sensation in my body? Sometimes we go, it's pain, 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 and we can't come up with a feeling. But what we're looking for is, what's the emotion trapped in the nervous system? What's the emotion trapped in the nervous system? And once you can start identifying that, now I'm going to name it. I feel afraid, or I feel sad, or it might be a combination of all kinds of feelings. I feel grief. And what we're going to do then is use our coping strategies. So we're going to use our breathing. We're going to use self compassion. We're going to now write it out. To get it out, we're going to go talk to somebody. We're going to reach out to a support system. Maybe we're going to go to a 12-step program or a grief group, or try to get some help. We might go to the doctor, go to the therapist. We might need to call 988. We are going to now, and pets, I really cannot emphasize how helpful pets are. And we underestimate the power of pets. Why are pets so important? Because they love us unconditionally. They love us, and our physical touch with a pet will automatic. There's research, but pet scans, not pet, like, but pet scans of the brain and the body, showing that it helps regulate the nervous system. That's why we have therapy dogs that work in hospital settings, or they work in clinics because they settle the nervous system. So if you have a pet that you connect with and feel safe with, that helps you also with coping with feelings and emotions and fears and anxiety and depression. And I don't think we talk about that enough, and how it settles the nervous system and settles the body.
Well, it's been interesting, because we've done a lot of research lately in the Jensen family around horses. We have a horse now, and there's a lot of focus on equine therapy. And my wife Julie Jensen has loved to go work in the barn lately, and just the hands-on, and you know what I mean. And so you can see why that, like you said, it gets you focused on something, the touch, the human interaction or animal interaction. It's just been interesting to kind of see that and do some more research around that. I'll probably have to get like more dogs now because of this conversation. But that's okay. But there is a huge
We've got
component
3.
of that.
So
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're only at 2 and a horse. So, and yeah. So, but again, and I also, is there some kind of component too of like having to take care of something, having that responsibility? Does that play into that component as well?
yeah, you have a purpose. It gives you
Yeah.
purpose and
Right.
meaning. So when you love another human or a pet or another soul, that feeds you. So that it's a it's like a figure eight. It's like infinity. That's where you get an abundance of love because not only are you loving the pet is loving you back. And there is a lot of research on equine therapy, by the way, on
Yeah.
how powerful I've done it myself.
Yeah.
It is the horse and with a lot of animals, they can sense what you feel,
Yeah.
even if you're not connected to it. They know, like if you're anxious, the horse will respond in that to mirror back to you. This is a key to mirror back to you what's happening in your nervous system. And that's and then how assertive are you in your life? Were you not allowed to have a voice? Were you, conditioned out of your voice? Were you, not allowed to speak up and were you not heard? Well, that's going to come across when you're working with a horse. So a lot of it is working with your sense of self and empowerment and stepping into your confidence and who you are and releasing the trauma that's held you back or the belief systems or the conditioning because that plays a big role in depression, right? If we're not allowed to have a voice and we're not allowed to say how we feel, guess what we do? We internalize it.
Yeah.
We turn it inward. Anxiety typically will turn it more outward. Depression turns it more inward. And that's a big difference. So that's what we're working on a lot of times is allowing the person to have a voice to say how they feel without the shame taking over. And horses and animals are amazing for that.
That's awesome. Can we spend a few minutes talking a little bit? There's a lot of folks that have young kids, that tune in, which I really appreciate as well. I obviously have young kids. You have older kids now, but are still going through, life's challenges. They always do, right? And so, can we talk a little bit about what maybe depression or loneliness may look like in a youth, and then as a parent, maybe how we address that? I think that's something that we try to work on every day at our house. Is how do we be a better parent? How do we approach things differently? How do we and it's easier said than done all the time, but can you talk a little bit about identifying that and then kind of how we approach it as parents or grandparents or caretakers?
Yes, I think this is a really important point. Isolation, withdrawing from their normal activities. And this is true across the board, but particularly with kids and teens. If you see them, let's say they loved going, to ice skating, or they like to be with their friends and go to the basketball games, or whatever they loved. Let's say they loved, being on the robotics team, and all of a sudden they don't want to do that anymore, and they're withdrawing more. Those are signs. Those are the number one, that's the number one sign. Okay. So if you see behavior changes, social changes, things they used to enjoy, they're not enjoying anymore, they're withdrawing more, they're not talking as much. Now, some kids aren't very vocal, anyways, but if you see a change in behavior, right? Maybe they're not showering as much or brushing their teeth as much. Maybe their eating habits have changed. Maybe they're upticking social media or internet usage or video games. Those are signs. Friendship changes. Let's say they change their friend group and all of a sudden they've got different friends. And facials, like in the body. It lives in the body. So if you see how I'm kind of hunching down more, I'm not really looking at you, I'm withdrawing, and maybe I'm really defensive, or I'm getting snappy, or I'm hiding more. Those are all indicators that something's going on underneath, and to really start holding space, asking how they're feeling. And if you need, a counselor to get involved at the school or another counselor, I highly recommend asking for support, listening to podcasts about how to parent. Like if something changes, listening to a podcast about depression. This is the other thing I want to make a very important note over. Please do not hesitate to ask somebody, do you want to kill yourself?
Mm.
And this is so hard to say, but suicidal ideation increases if you're really in a depressive state. Your thoughts of I'm a burden, I shouldn't be here anymore, nobody would care if I was gone. Those are really important cues. So I'm going to ask. And I have one of my therapists that is excellent. And she said, you know what I say? And I said, oh, what do you say? Like, and she goes, one of my supervisors told me to say, do you want to be dead, buried in the ground? And I know this is scary to say. And it's important that you ask the question, do you have thoughts of suicide? If they say yes, now I'm going to ask, tell me more about that. Okay. Please do not shy away. I know you don't might not feel equipped, but we have not been taught to ask these questions because we think we're planting seeds. That is an absolute myth. 100% myth. Research shows it. It's actually the opposite. Not asking is what really makes a bigger impact. And when we talk about depression, kids and teens and anybody depressed, if you feel like, "Oh, I don't know," please ask.
Mhm.
Please ask and get support. 988. If you just need to call 988 because you don't know how to handle it, you can. They'll give you information. They'll help you walk along what to say, what not to say. There's lots of podcast episodes on it. There's tons of research on the internet on how to walk you through it, but do not be afraid to ask the question.
I think that's the point. Is not, do not be afraid to ask those hard questions, and then it comes from a place of love and caring. And I think we have to get, as a society, to your point, we're not trained that way. How, obviously, if a parent has a suspect that a child is depressed or lonely, obviously you don't have to go straight to that question. What are some other maybe probing questions that we could ask? A few examples of probing questions to learn more.
So the number one thing I recommend is you can say, "Hey, I've noticed, you're not wanting to play your video games as much anymore." I'm making this up, but whatever the question is, what their behavior change has been. "Hey, I noticed you're not talking to Susie anymore. Tell me about it." And they may not tell you, but you're noticing. I need you to notice. If I can teach you one thing, please notice what you feel and please notice what your loved ones feel. You don't have to be a mind reader. I don't want you to be a mind reader. I want you to notice. I want you to be attuned enough to say, "Oh, I notice you seem more sad lately. Is that how you feel or am I off?" And I say, I can be out to lunch, but I really want to know, how are you feeling? What's going on for you? Tell me more. And those are specific questions. So I'm noticing you're not really talking to Susie anymore. Tell me about that. I noticed that you used to really love to go ice skating and you haven't been in a while. Tell me about that. Tell me about that as an open question. How are you feeling? I love that question. A lot of times they're going to go fine. Is anything wrong? No. So those kind of close-ended questions I stay away from. You need open-ended questions and then soften your voice. Don't come at it with trying to fix it. Please put your toolkit away. The more you try to fix it, they're going to shut down and not tell you anything. So if you're like, well, you can just, you should go talk to your counselor at school. Guess what they're going to do? I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. So you say, hold a space for mirror back what you hear them say. So it sounds like you're really, sad. Susie doesn't want to be your friend anymore. And she doesn't want, she ices you out. And that's really hard. Empathy. Okay. And then if you really feel like you're going to say, "Hey, do you think it'd be helpful for you to feel better to talk to somebody?" Hey, I talked to somebody. It's been super helpful for me. They're non-judgmental and they can help you feel better. And then you get resources either from the school counselor, you get on the internet and Google, you ask a friend if they have recommendations. And that's super important that you're saying you're worth it. You are worth it. You
Yeah.
matter to me and I love you and I care about you.
And even just noticing those traits, they'll at least take pride in the fact that you paid attention to them and you have noticed them. That's
Notice,
huge.
that's a huge word. If you just
Yes.
notice people, if you're
Notice people.
disconnected from yourself, you're not gonna notice other people because
Yeah.
you're kind of sleepwalking through your life. So you gotta notice what you feel first so you can notice other people.
Yeah.
And that is the greatest gift you can give yourself and other people, truly.
Well, this half an hour has been a gift that you've given to a lot of people, Kristen Boyce. So thank you so much, as always, for engaging in this conversation. A tough one, but one we're going to continue to have. You mentioned it already, but if people are having challenges, if it's you that feel this way, or if you know somebody, or if you are stuck, 988 is where we go. We can't say that enough. 988 is where we go to make that call. Just have a conversation. There's someone there ready, willing, wanting to have that conversation with you to help you through this. So
here's the book I mentioned. It's Not Always Depression. And you can see
not always depression.
I've got it.
You got it flagged. You're ready to go.
So if you need it, take a screenshot, look it up. It's I highly worth. It's a great book.
Well, good. Well, Kristen Boyce, as always, thank you for your service to this community, and we'll be back next month with another edition of the Mental Health Monday. But thanks again, Kristen.
Thank you.
I love that.